Hadas Thier is the author of A People's Guide to Capitalism. She is a member of DSA. She contributes to a frequent contributor to Jacobin magazine. And this is, I think, the perfect conversation to have as we are about to be dealing with a very capitalist Democratic Party that we have to influence. Hadas, thanks for joining today.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.
So we've seen, a populist guide to socialism, populist guide, an anti-capitalist guide to socialism, all these different perspectives. But what inspired you to write this book on capitalism for populists?
Well, my main thinking really is that I think the economy has to be in the hands of the people, right? That ultimately that's our main goal. That's the vision of how we can make really fundamental change. That the machinations of the economy so far have been left up to the so-called experts, and that has gone terribly wrong for as long as capitalism goes back. And it needs to be in the hands of the people. But in order for that to take place, in order for us to be able to make the kind of demands that we need to make, to organize our side properly, ultimately to overturn the way that the economy works, we have to understand it. And I think systematically we've been told, especially, depending on what, constituencies you fall under, but especially working people, women, people of color, have been told that this is something that is beyond our reach, that it's too complicated for us to understand. And if it seems off, then maybe that's just something wrong with us. And in reality, we actually have a much better understanding of how things work because we live it. But we have to like really drill down and understand what are the ways, what are the things that make capitalism tick? What are the contradictions that make it go into crisis? What are the contradictions that can be, that we can take advantage of to try to push through on, and that's really, I think, the role of Marxism and Marxist economics is to really understand the system in order to change it.
That's one of the things that I think is I don't hear enough of right now is Marx had a complete understanding that we lived in a capitalist, and he wasn't necessarily opposed to capitalism. It was just through what lens. That's my reading of it. But I think there's this calling out the enemy in the last few years, which is extremely important, right? We need to understand that capitalism is broken before we start to break it down. And it would be interesting to kind of go back and look at 2008, right? In 2008, Obama, his way of fixing the economy was from the top down. It wasn't from the bottom up. It was very much like the Larry Summerses of the world. And we know how that went. It protected the Wall Street class. It protected the executives. It protected the big banks. And of course, millions of Americans, suffered as a result. So if you're looking at this economic crisis and say working class Joe puts on his working class hat, and it doesn't look like he's doing that with this transition team, but let's just pretend for a second he's doing that. How would you advise the president to learn from the mistakes of 2008 and 2009 and really stand for working class right now?
Right. Well, the first thing that absolutely has to happen is that we need relief. The stimulus negotiations that broke down in the summer, have left literally tens of millions of people without the kind of unemployment benefits to weather the storm, without the stimulus checks, without the moratorium on housing evictions. These are the things that are absolutely desperately needed. And so far they've been basically used as a political football, really by both parties, which I think is an outrage. And that's the thing that needs to happen right out of the gate is that we need relief, and we need it badly. We need to, basically the way that this crisis has been handled, or not handled, I should say, is that either, we go under complete lockdown, which health-wise is necessary, but people aren't given the kind of financial supports to make that possible. or we pry open the states, which is obviously what Trump and the Republicans have been advocates for, in order to get people back to work. But it's left people in, between a rock and a hard place. And so no wonder actually Trump's strategies have been, that there's been an audience for it, because people want to get back to life as normal as possible, because the option has been either lockdown and no jobs versus no lockdown and get back to your job. And that's just not, that's not a possible option. So if we actually want to solve this crisis, it is a health crisis, but it needs to be funded. And people need to be able to have enough money to stay home safely. That's the bare minimum. And then, there's other things that flow from that.
I mean, so much of this is, I think there's this juxtaposition, right? There's this, it's almost like they because we're such a Wall Street driven economy, like from their perspective, right? Consumer based economy. There's this, okay, well, we need to artificially inflate Wall Street. So there's this illusion that the economy is great. And then that's going to create this illusion that like people can spend their money. But then the other side, and there's this illusion that we need to rebuild our economy by keeping everything open, when you're saying, well, honestly, if we just were to make sure that people could pay their rent and could take care of themselves, and it actually would affect the rest of those things. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right, exactly. I mean, if the entire motive of society wasn't just profits and, like you said, keeping Wall Street happy, then you would cancel rent and moratorium for as long as the pandemic is ongoing. And then you would send people monthly checks that, a number of progressives have been calling for a long time, $2,000 a month. And, you would give people the financial supports and the social supports and so on to stay home while, and then information, I mean, it's obviously with Trump in office, we've had the opposite of information, but we need a national education campaign around vaccines, for instance. That's going to be a critical piece. But the problem is that our system doesn't know how to solve health problems. It knows how to solve economic problems, and it barely knows how to solve economic problems. But and when I say economic problems, I mean, like you're saying, the profits of corporations and Wall Street and the stock market and so on. That's what the system was able to do very quickly. The Federal Reserve is pumping trillions of dollars. There's all these debates happening in Congress about the stimulus bills. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve, without any oversight, without any democratic accountability, just is pumping trillions of dollars into the financial markets. And that they were able to do right away. And yet to actually, provide things like masks, basic things that we need, masks, ventilators, the equipment that's needed to fight this pandemic, the system is completely unable to do that. It sent states into bidding wars with each other. I mean, that's right. the way that the market works.
It's actually crazy that like you have this supposedly like Democratic leaders bidding with other states. That's not how this was supposed to be set up by any means. All right, so Joe Biden has to come up with something like big and bold, mainly just for his own legacy. That's like, I'm just looking at it through the lens of, okay, Joe Biden does not want to, after several times running for president, he doesn't want to inherit this moment and really, suck like the way that Obama did. He didn't. I think that the verdict came in for Obama. It was like a slow verdict. I think, activists really knew, folks organizing around the $15 minimum wage knew, folks in Wisconsin who were fighting and were waiting for Obama to lace up his boots and show up on the ground, they knew. But it was like a sliding awareness. And I think folks are still starting to understand that like the economic recovery was not what they thought it was supposed to be. But Joe Biden's not going to be awarded that luxury at all. No. So what should he do day one? Like if he had like 5 things.
Yeah, well, so let me just say one thing first of all, which is that Joe Biden, unlike Obama, Obama ran on, on change and hope and yes, we can. Joe Biden ran on I'm not Donald Trump, and that was the beginning and end of his campaign. And so it's going to be very difficult. It's difficult to imagine him going bold and aggressive when, you know, historically the way it usually works, right, is that candidates make a lot of big promises and then they break them when they're in office. But there are no promises to be broken here. He's barely made any promises, really. I mean, a few here and there that he hasn't even really talked about that much. So, for instance, a $15 minimum wage, he was on record for supporting it, which is great. Although at this point, it needs to be more like a $22 minimum wage. But okay, we'll start with 15. But he didn't campaign on $15 minimum wage. And so we have this absurd situation where you have voters in Florida voting, rightly so, for a $15 minimum wage, but also voting for Trump. And the majority, when the exit polls show that actually the majority of people that saw the economy as their number one issue actually voted for Trump and thought that he was handling the economy well. I mean, that's historically unprecedented, but the Democrats have been completely unable to make hay of this economic crisis and the mishandling of it. So it's hard to imagine. However, I think you're right that it kind of behooves us as the left to have our understanding of what needs to happen, and to try to push for that on day one and in the lead up to day one. So I think, if we're talking five things, it's what I was saying before about a relief bill that needs to happen just right out of the gate. And so which of those things can happen by executive order and which of those things have to happen through fighting for it, which is going to be challenging given the state of, what the Senate will look like. But there needs to be a robust relief package that looks very much like the CARES Act, although there's a lot of stuff that was in there that was not so good. But we need to maintain the things that were good. We need $2,000 instead of $1,200, say stimulus bills. Instead of a one-off thing, it should go out every month. We need to extend unemployment benefits back to $600, extra $600 a month from the federal government. We need a federal moratorium on rent and eviction and mortgage payments and evictions. Those would be the top things. In addition to that, I think there needs to be money that goes, whether it's made available through the Federal Reserve or otherwise, that needs to be made available to state budgets ASAP. Our state budgets are tanking right now.
Why is that?
Because there isn't revenue being generated, right? Because companies have shut down. Some of them have reopened. Some of them have not been able to reopen. But states have lost a tremendous amount of revenue and are already enacting severe budget cuts. So we're in this absurd situation where in the middle of a pandemic, actually, healthcare budgets are being slashed and hospitals are enacting layoffs in hospitals during a pandemic. And this goes back to the complete inability of capitalism to deal with a health crisis. So state budgets need money ASAP. That's the other thing that is necessary. And we need to, both for the sake of the current crisis and the pandemic, and for the sake of our overall, the overall public good, education and healthcare needs to be refunded. And that's obviously a problem that goes back much further than this pandemic and much further than Donald Trump, and has been a bipartisan attack that has left us completely vulnerable to this pandemic.
So, some have, this has even made it into like the Wall Street Journal or in Financial Times, and like the IMF has sort of even alluded to this, which is mind blowing, but it just shows you how severe the crisis at this moment is. And all of those places are not beholden to like lobbyists and donors too. So they have a little bit more freedom to say what we've all known for a long time, that neoliberalism is dead. And you can't get your way out of this through incrementalism. You can't solve the education crisis by having charter schools. I mean, we know that there's no way. I think Biden even knows that at this point, that it's just run its course, and it's created the pathway for Donald Trump, and of course a horrible crisis which could come in. That's the thing, is like, leaders have to be aware that at any moment a crisis could come in, any moment, something, an earthquake, a meteor, a pandemic, whatever, a war. And then that's what you have to prepare for, is it's just like, a household being able to prepare for the worst crisis that could hit them. Mm-hmm. But you wrote this book, People's Guide to Capitalism, and I'm very curious, like, if there was a way to, I guess, message to like normie voters, the people who may not even know what neoliberalism is, but think that they're the Democratic headliners are going to solve this problem. How would you message like the basic points of your book to the normie voter?
Okay, good question. Well, I would say, just first of all, that one thing that has been clear, I think it's been clear for a bunch of years, but certainly with this last election, and the exit polls show it, that like socialist principles and socialistic principles are quite popular. That things like minimum wage, taxing the rich, more money for education. These are the things that have won referendums in both blue states and red states, blue counties and red counties. So I think, first of all, that's one thing that we have to say, is that the idea that left-wing ideas are somehow, can't resonate with people in Middle America or wherever, I think is false. And I think the popularity of Bernie's campaign showed that, and I think the popularity and the growth of AOC and the Squad and so on, I think also point to that. And I think, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like recently has been talking about that, about how in swing states, the same senators that actually were in favor of Medicare for all won their elections, and those that weren't didn't. So I think this whole idea that, and Fox News had these polls that they reported on themselves, that the majority of people want national health care. Surprise, surprise. Even Fox News has to read these polls. So I think that's the first thing to say, is that actually, basic socialistic ideas, I think, can resonate quite widely. I think in terms of my book and why talk about capitalism and why have a socialist lens, the way that I would explain it to most people is that, look, our system isn't working, and I think that most people agree that it isn't working, that a society where the leading cause of death among young children is hunger, even though the world produces enough food to feed the entire world over and then some, that's a sick society. A society that lets children die on a mass scale is not an advanced society. I'm sorry, it's a failure. And I think in the United States, we see how the pursuit of profit versus the pursuit of health and lives run completely counter to each other. That's been exposed, obviously, completely by the pandemic and how that has been handled. But, down the line, the U.S. is the number one emitter of carbon dioxide, the number one spender for military expenditures, has the number one, the greatest wealth and income inequality in advanced economies. And then at the same time, it's number 43, I believe, in terms of life expectancy. Oh, so that gives you a picture of, the top capitalist society in the world, the top superpower for both for capitalist economy and for military, et cetera, also happens to be, at the bottom of the list when it comes to health outcomes and life outcomes. Obviously we're at the top of the list for COVID deaths. And that's not a coincidence. That is the makings of neoliberal capitalism.
It's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who was visiting the United States for the first time last year, and he was really from Europe, and he was really struck by just the level of wealth. I mean, he saw the inequality on the streets of New York, and it just blew his mind and everybody was just kind of on top of each other. It's not like you have, the wealthy in one area. For those of you who don't live in New York, you're just immersed with everybody all the time. And he couldn't understand. He says, well, you have so much democracy, you have so much this, you have so much that. Is democracy failing? And I said, well, no, we are a capitalist country first, and then democracy. And we use our democracy to kind of enable different capitalist forces, but we're also a consumer base. So when someone gets sick, there's money to be made. And he didn't understand, like it was fascinating to see a European who clearly they have capitalism in Europe and neoliberalism, not just that little switch of understanding that when someone suffers in the US, there's money to be made. And it's not to that extent in Europe. It does exist clearly, but not to that extent. So
yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. And we were saying earlier about how what the market did in relation to COVID. It's like, in theory, the way that the best part of capitalism is supposed to be that it can at least deliver the goods, right? It's like the market is supposed to be in tune to what we want, et cetera. But that's actually not what the market is for. The market is for delivering profits. And at any expense. So, the masks weren't available. However, mask makers made a lot of money. I mean, the price of masks septupled, I think I don't know how you say it, 7 times what the normal rate is. I mean, that's insane. That should be illegal. The idea that you can profiteer off of a pandemic is insane.
I think it is illegal, actually. and I'm hoping that there is some sort of investigation that comes out of this, on the other side, but we can only hope. Hadas, fascinating conversation. Check out Hadas's book. It is at Haymarket. I recommend you buy it there. It is A People's Guide to Capitalism. She is also a frequent contributor to Jacobin and active at DSA, a New Yorker like myself. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Hope to have you on again soon. I'm sure there's tons to talk about. So.
Great. Thanks, Nomiki.
Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.